To Helles and Back is my attempt at an overview of the participation of chaplains in the Dardanelles campaign. Whenever I volunteer to do one of these talks, I always seem to bite off more than I can chew. So I think I've probably done it again, but here goes, and let's see what we can come up with. Ooh, just trying to forward my screen. Yeah. So, what is a chaplain? Well, in 1915, they would be an ordained clergyman of one of the Christian denominations who had either volunteered for service or been nominated by church authorities, particularly so with Anglican bishops making decisions. Are they any different to padres, which is a word you may have heard as well? No. Padre is really a less formal, more colloquial term for chaplain that sprang into usage during the Napoleonic Peninsular Wars, and much like most army slang, stuck. I'll tend to use the words interchangeably tonight, so I hope that doesn't offend any purists out there. The vast majority of chaplains who served with the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force were men who had volunteered to serve after August 19, with even the regular 29th Division not able to rely on any chaplains who were part of the 120 full-time members of the Army Chaplains Department at the beginning of the war. Some chaplains are well known to students of the campaign. The published writings of men like Crichton and Best, serving with the 29th and 42nd Divisions respectively, have served to educate many of us about the campaign. The bravery of men such as Fahey and Finn of the Australian 3rd Brigade and the 86th Brigade, respectively, who ignored restrictions on their participation to land with their comrades on 25th April 1915, is well known. It's tempting to start this presentation with Father Finn, and yes, I've given in. He was one of the few Royal Dublin Fusiliers to make it to shore from the SS River Clyde, her tows and boats on 25th April. He shouldn't have been there. Chaplains were not meant to land with the first wave. Although the exact circumstances of his death cannot be confirmed, it appears that he did make it to land and was shot multiple times, maybe or maybe not having been able to minister to his fallen comrades. The first Catholic chaplain to be killed during the war, his bravery was recognized with the award of a military cross. Should Finn be eulogized or criticized? Although his presence might have been comforting for the few he was able to help, it was disconcerting for those present. An eyewitness who survived the carnage later wrote home, "Dear Joe, the worst of all was we had a priest who came along with us. He was in the boat. He insisted on coming with us, as he said he would be wanted for the poor boys. They were all calling for him, but the poor priest could do nothing for them. He got out of the boat afterwards and made a great run for the beach, but the Turks got him as soon as he landed, for he was hit 4 times. He died that evening, but he's still asking for us up to the time he died." Finn's sacrifice also denied his presence and support to those who survived, the fit and the wounded. He would not be there to help the Dublin Fusiliers recover from their first day losses. His brother, though, would later be the benefactor for the building of St. Saviour's Church, or the Sacred Heart Church, in Hull. Unlike Father Finn, John Fahey survived the April the 25th landings. From Gallipoli, he wrote that he was shot twice through my overcoat without the skin being touched. I had a book shot out of my hands. The jam tin I was eating out of was shot through. Evacuated sick in July, he resumed duty in September and then remained at Gallipoli until 7th November, later receiving the award of the DSO. In 1914, the Army Chaplains Department included official representations of the Anglican, 89, Presbyterian, 11, and Roman Catholic denominations of Christianity. At this time, Methodists were only operating as acting chaplains. The numbers would expand greatly. Over 5,000 were commissioned by November 1918, and more than 170 of that number had died by the end of the war. Chaplains were considered to be part of the officers' mess, with four ranks, first to fourth, fourth being, of course, the lowest. In peacetime, King's regulations expected chaplains to lead regular church parades, take funerals, provide religious instruction, visit prisoners in military custody, and provide recreational activities and welfare support. On the peninsula, when not organising or leading services, chaplains tended to act as helpers with dressing stations, supporting stretcher bearer teams, and another function that they performed was an unwelcome one, as censors of mail, which they did not particularly enjoy. The chaplain's paraphernalia didn't take up much kit space. A small valise would contain the essentials for Holy Communion or the Eucharist. It was this Christian ritual for men of all persuasions, and sometimes none previous, that seemed to provide the most comfort to men on active service, whether in the front line or hospital. Chaplains seem to have little place in many of the diaries from Gallipoli that I've read. In the 440 entries and 4,000 words in C.H.T. Lucas's Gallipoli diaries, only once does he refer to a chaplain. On October the 21st, 1915, he records, "Shaw, the new Church of England chaplain for the brigade, arrived." Maybe this was an event of great note. However, maybe not. On the same day, the brigade headquarters war diary notes that there is nothing to chronicle. Lucas had previously recorded the disconcerting impact of a King's Own Scottish Borderers church parade on the 30th of May, saying a good deal of shelling by the Turks started in our neighbourhood, probably by the KOSB's holding church parade in the open. Not actually this one, but you can see the issue. As a general rule, dynamic, oh, sorry, yeah, I'll leave it up. As a general rule, dynamic and ambitious younger clergymen rarely sought positions as chaplains. Although seen by some regular officers as an encumbrance or an irrelevance, their practical support in the field and contribution to morale meant that they were usually more than tolerated. Not all had to contend with unhelpful commanders in the way that Ivo Hood did. He recounts a conversation. Commanding officer: I don't know if you will have many men at your service. Hood, with a question: Why, Colonel? You made the arrangements yourself. Commanding officer: Yes, but there's a more important job. The men are digging out latrines. Douglas Hurd was rather busy in December 1915, taking over command of the BEF. I can't find much corroboration for this quote, but if it's genuine, then it's a ringing endorsement of the role of chaplains, or maybe even a sideswipe about generals, I don't know. Anyway, I think it's only right that we should look at some of those good chaplains. Here's one example. William Grant. At midday on September the 28th of August 1915, a very hot summer's day, two chaplains wearing distinctive Red Cross armbands and focused on finding, assisting wounded soldiers were inexplicably allowed to roam beyond the captured maze of trenches at Hill 60. Sadly for one of these two non-combatants, death was literally round the corner of a shared trench. Shot ran out, and one of the men, the taller and older of the two, crumpled, and the other man, seeing two oncoming Ottomans, beat a hasty retreat. It was Chaplain William Grant, a Presbyterian, who fell. His companion on this humanitarian had been Chaplain Charles Dobson, a Church of England padre. He explained what happened in a letter sent to his cousin in New Zealand shortly afterwards. Major Grant was killed. He and I were dressing wounded and walked right into the Turks. They were pretty rattled and their fire was wild. He was shot through the throat and died at once. I fell behind a corner and some bodies and was only splashed with earth. I made a bolt for it and got back to our own lines. We got his body out on the night of the next day after the light horse had driven the enemy out. His boots were gone and also a number of discs we had taken from the dead. It was very tragic. We were dressing a Turk with a badly shattered thigh and shoulder when it happened. We were in a bad position and the fire was pretty hot. The Turk was a decent old sort, and we had to lie flat to dress him, and he kept pulling me down. Grant gave him a sip of wine and said to me, "Sort of good Samaritan picture this." And I said, "I don't think the priest and Levite have come this road." He said, "Well, we joke, but we are in the shadow of death and may get it at any moment." Grant had managed to establish a reputation whilst he was on the peninsula. And this is just one comment made about him by a soldier writing in a letter home, which acknowledges the highest respect that the soldier personally held for him and also that of everyone else on the beach. This is his memorial stone. As you see, he was born in 1859. So in the latter part of his 40s when this event took place. Oh no, in his 50s, isn't he? Yeah. But out there succoring both friend and foe. Another good chaplain would be Walter Dexter. When you're short of pots for coffee and a redneck Johnny toffee, doesn't seem as if his kindness would evoke your warmest thanks. Would you stand and look perplexed, or would you send for Padre Dexter? His life has received some attention down under, with a biography being published in March this year, and an even more recent podcast on ABC. Although Walter would become the most decorated chaplain in the AIF, he had been born in Birkenhead, England, in 1873. Serving with Lumsden's horse, he had won the DCM during the Boer War. One of the first padres to volunteer for service overseas, while serving his parish in Melbourne, he would earn the sobriquet the Pinching Padre because of his expertise in securing welfare supplies for his men. Dexter was to take some of the most candid photographs on the peninsula, such as these here. One of which was colorized and sold widely by a photographic studio in Sydney 100 years ago. Before the evacuation Dexter undertook the surveying and mapping of the Anzac cemeteries and was awarded the DSO for his Gallipoli service in 1916. A particular mythology seems to have developed around William Mackenzie. Mackenzie soon made his presence felt even on the transport from Australia. He was a big man with a big voice to match. He conducted the usual church parades, but also organised concerts and sports. But unlike many chaplains, he joined in, taking particular delight in the boxing contests. His long reach, jarring uppercuts, and dangerous half hooks apparently left some of the AIF's best fighters dazed. His earliest AIF nicknames were Holy Joe, Salvation Joe, then Padre Mac, but he was soon to become famous as Fighting Mac. Mac was a Salvationist chaplain, uh, one of the few serving with the forces at this time. Observing that water carriers had difficulties on part of the track, he spent most of the night cutting out a series of steps. He enjoyed the company of all types of men, and with a relaxed manner and broad sense of humour, encouraged them to talk freely to them. One soldier remarked, "I'm not religious, Mac, but your damned religion'll do me every damned time." He became known and renowned as a soldier as well as a chaplain. Uh, Whether true or not, Mackenzie didn't deny these stories. Reports abound, like there are many myths at Gallipoli possibly, that he led charges, often armed only with a shovel. At the end of the war, Mackenzie was so popular, it could take him 3 hours to walk from his office on Goldbourne Street to the Sydney Town Hall, a mere 3 blocks away. People mobbed him to shake his hand. During the first part of the campaign, chaplains were hard pushed to officiate at all the burial services needed. Mackenzie would bury 170 men in his first 17 days. They might have been men whose bodies they had discovered, men that they had tended in the casualty stations or ministered to in recent services. Often there were multiple bodies to bury. Padre Green's method of coping was not the same as all his colleagues, but it is well understandable. The provision of other services very rarely took the form of regular church parades unless in rest camps on Imbros, and would often feature biscuit or ammunition boxes as altars. Padres ministered where and when they could, driven by the understanding communicated by Reverend Watson, a Baptist chaplain. The great need most deeply felt by the bulk out here is the conscious presence of God. Chambers and Emden's excellent Gallipoli, the Dardanelles disaster, in soldiers' words and photographs, includes contributions from the diary of another good chaplain, Reverend A.G. Parham, whose first day on the peninsula was a baptism of fire with the 2nd South Midland Mounted Brigade in the advance across the Salt Lake and the assault on Scimitar Hill. About halfway across the valley, perhaps a mile and a half from our starting place, the enemy guns found us. High explosive shrapnel and star shells, which soon set alight the gorse and bushes with which the plain was covered. Pearson, the doctor, would not stop to attend to the wounded, but wanted to stay with the brigade marching on. But I had no particular job to do, and I could not leave these wounded to be burned alive by the gorse fire. I stopped beside a group of 6, one of whom was dead, and did what we could to patch up their wounds with field dressings. Parham did his best to sum up what had happened to all our splendid, clean young yeomen and all the rest, and wonders how he is still alive in the midst of all the losses. But Parham was not the only one to wonder how he beat the odds and survived. Foster of the Royal Naval Division had arrived in early May. Within a month, he was writing in his diary, went to the field ambulance all day, heard the terrible news that Major Roberts, Henry, Warwick, Rowe, Richmond, Fraser, Brown, and Flood are all killed. It is too horrible to think of. Words are quite inadequate to express all I feel. Only Jones, Balance, Ashley, Walsh, and I are left now, and indeed the whole 2nd RM Brigade is reduced now to 1,050. They were all my best friends, and may they rest in peace. Father Cameron's diary covers the second half of the campaign. He was with the Highland Mounted Brigade, the Lovat Scouts. Within the confines of their role, chaplains had a lot of freedom. They were able to plan their own day and develop their own ministry. He records how other chaplains do or don't deal with the challenge of their roles. Some he regards as simply responding by hiding, others by having a reckless disregard for their own safety, and that there were one or two who got themselves invalided out with dubious ailments. Cameron's diary is quite candid about his fellow padres. One C of E parson is recorded as just sitting on his bottom, bathing and eating. Others are named. Padre Lee is recorded as not fancying this thing at all. And apparently Father Day is deemed cracked. They call him the Mad Padre, and so he is. Even the senior Roman Catholic cleric Auricula is outed for doing nothing but toasting himself in the sun and cursing fiercely about coming here. Like many of the other chaplain diarists, Cameron is honest about his struggles on the peninsula and in his role, but also proud of his commitment to the men. After a month, he recognized that this thing, chaplaincy, can only be worked properly by remaining with the men. If I carry on like this, each man can make his confession once a week and rest in peace. Cameron describes the realities of ministering in the front line. No vestments, but a stole over my khaki. Muddy slacks, tunic covered with dirt, unshaven, and an empty biscuit box as an altar. When a group of Padres gathers in October, Cameron notes that 5 of ours, Roman Catholics, are all more or less seedy. Cameron himself collapsed with severe pleurisy on the 10th of December 1915 and was evacuated to Mudros and then to Malta. Although he'd left the peninsula, it never really left him. And when he died in 1931, it was said that his lungs had never recovered from Gallipoli. Some of the chaplains were larger-than-life characters or famous in their pre-Gallipoli lives. Richard Cattell was one of these men. A rugby blue whilst at Oxford University, he had played rugby for England and then football for Tring AFC before taking holy orders. And it wasn't just the British forces that had chaplains. The next image is of a French soldier priest ministering in Gallipoli, one of 20,000 in the French armed forces across the globe. Now, like many of you, I have read numerous diaries and letters written by participants in the Dardanelles campaign. Chaplin's commentary is different. Perhaps it reflects the fact that they were often more mature and well educated, but more likely that they were more articulate, trained to put ideas and the faith by which they tried to live into words. Their calling required them to assess the moral complexities thrown up by war and demanded that they be reflective. Reading them is definitely an education and gives a different perspective to perhaps the daily progress of the campaign that we often read about. Now, each brigade of the Australian forces, 4,000 rifles, would have two Anglican, one Roman Catholic, and one representative of other Protestant denominations. When volunteers were asked for, the message seemed to be that natural-born Australians need not apply, as only those born in the British Isles were initially appointed. We've heard how old Mac was, but many of these other early volunteers were also comparatively old. Reverend Andrew Gillison, a Presbyterian, had been born in 1868. Bladen of the 23rd Battalion had been born in 1865, and so is 50. Being older did not guarantee unfitness for the rigours of life on the peninsula, but many chaplains suffered the same illnesses and afflictions that blighted the lives of so many during the campaign. Neither the aforementioned Best or Crichton survived the campaign unscathed. Sharing the lives of the 42nd East Lancs or the 29th Division meant exposure to the risks faced by their men. Best's family received this template message in July after just 10 weeks on the peninsula. Hood didn't arrive on the peninsula until October 1915, allocated to 54th Division with Coggan to replace men that had gone sick. He didn't much like the idea that they could suffer the same fate as those that preceded them. Now, in my research, I'll go back. I will go back. In my research, there were some clergymen who were serving as pre-war clergymen who chose not to take a formal role as a chaplain. They actually enlisted as combatants, others as non-combatants. One such example was the Reverend H.A. Thomas, a 32-year-old Anglican curate from Alsager in Cheshire. He enlisted in 1915 with the RAMC and later transferred to become a naval chaplain, primarily because he had seen the potential for chaplains to make a contribution and how it could be done so wrong. He writes, "The Methodist chaplain was with us. Our Church of England man, a frail person utterly unfitted for hardship, having been invalided away within a few days of landing. The Methodists decided to hold the communion service and issued an invite to all who cared to come. The service was held in a hollow among the sandhills. The elements consisted of pieces of army biscuits on a pattern, which half an hour earlier had been the bottom of a tobacco tin. The wine was water seasoned with a lemonade cube. The reason for the insertion of the lemonade cube was a mystery to me at the time. Perhaps it was intended to make a difference from ordinary water. Anyway, no better substitutes could be devised, and we received the distribution of faith and were not a little comforted." Many chaplains were convinced that their service was a divine appointment, Crichton stating, "I am quite sure this was just the place I should have been." Not all of the chaplains remained allocated to frontline units on the peninsula. Padres were based at the hospitals and theatre, and then at the hospitals in the evacuation chain in Alexandria and Malta. Other chaplains were responsible for the base camps in Egypt that were the transit points for replacement drafts and formations on their way to the Dardanelles. As with most of the rest of the campaign, the organisation, structure and support of the chaplaincy arrangements became more developed as the campaign went on. At the beginning, the expectation was that chaplains would not be part of the initial landings. There was an early recognition that they should, however, that they should be allowed into the frontline trenches beyond the usual restriction of the dressing station. With the whole of the MEF area under fire, there were no real safe zones anyway. Yet frontline postings proved challenging. Even those who rose to the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual challenge were exhausted, and some did not cope at all. In an attempt to maintain the well-being of Padres, they began to be rotated through postings at hospitals and in the front line. This was one of the innovations developed by the principal chaplain in theatre, Horden, and Price, who was brought in to provide a bishop-type role to support chaplains. Occasional chaplain conferences were developed for Horden and Price to provide organisational and spiritual direction of their men on the peninsula. Some chaplains never got near the peninsula itself. Oops. There we go. Guy Thornton, a New Zealand Baptist padre based at one of the base camps in Egypt, as an example. He was initially invalided home, exhausted in 1915, after committing himself to regularly visiting the red light district to seek and guide soldiers away from sinful activities, but returned to his work in Egypt, later accompanying the 5th Reinforcements. Despite his role, he was popular with the Anzac troops. After Egypt and a further bout of illness, he was seconded to work with the YMCA in Europe and conducted missions in army camps throughout Britain and wrote a book about his experiences. Even ministry at base hospitals was demanding. Apart from the hospitals in theatre on the islands, these included sites in Egypt, Alexandria, and Cairo, and multiple locations on the island of Malta. Sharing the final hours of brave men was a privilege, but much strength, physical, mental, and spiritual, is needed. For the more evangelistic denominations, the situation presented an opportunity to present the gospel to men they would never normally be able to reach. The Baptist Times records a tent rally in Alexandria, with many recuperating from Gallipoli and due to return. Watson, a Baptist chaplain, asserts that he'd never spoken to a more responsive audience, and never, I think, have I felt a deeper sense of responsibility, for some would not return again. As they settled themselves to listen, as men before whom the issues of life and death were sharply set with a strained attention, there was a silence that seemed otherworldly. I've never described myself as an expert on Gallipoli chaplains. For that, you'd be well served by accessing the work of Dr. Linda Parker in particular. Her own Gallipoli Association Zoom talk include details that supplement the excellent chapter that she's written in Gallipoli News Perspectives on the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, 1915 to 1916. My interest in chaplains is a mixture of my own faith journey, the existence of 12 ministers of religion in my close and wider family, and one of whom was an RAF chaplain in the Western Desert during the Second World War, and a high degree of admiration for those whose faith drove them to serve their fellow men. And I have come to the conclusion that it is very difficult to do their work full justice in a short talk like this. How indeed can you explore so many individuals who who made an impact, like Dexter, uh, who at the end of his time on the peninsula went through the cemeteries and gullies scattering silver wattle seed and saying, if we are to leave here, I intend that a bit of Australia shall be here. One Padre participant in the campaign was determined to ensure that the sacrifice of the 29th Division at Gallipoli and the other constituent parts of the MEF would not be forgotten. Henry Arthur Hall, Vicar of Holy Trinity, Eltham, dedicated a memorial chapel to them and instituted an annual service of remembrance by trust deed, which, as someone said earlier, still continues today. Some padres had their faith destroyed or changed by what they experienced on the peninsula. Some found their faith heightened, their lives' mission accentuated by their experiences. They had all been to hell and back, and we thank them for their sacrifice. Thank you, everybody.